They told you it was about free trade, and they told you it was about geopolitical stability. But what they didn't tell you is that they have just signed the death warrant for every family farm in France, while simultaneously legalizing the mass poisoning of the European population, because the deal that was just pushed through with the Mercosur bloc is not an economic agreement. It is a crime scene where the victim is the French peasant, and the weapon is a flood of unregulated, toxic sludge disguised as food. We are watching the final managed demolition of European food sovereignty, and it is happening right now in plain sight, with the full complicity of the very politicians who swore to protect the people from this exact scenario. On Friday, the European Union finally dropped the mask and signaled the approval of the trade pact with Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, effectively erasing decades of agricultural standards in a single afternoon and opening the gates to a tsunami of cheap beef and sugar and poultry that will wipe out domestic production within 5 years. This is not hyperbole, and this is not fear-mongering. This is simple arithmetic, because you cannot have a system where French farmers are banned from using 40 different pesticides and forced to leave land fallow for biodiversity, while their competitors in Brazil are spraying atrazine and glufosinate by the airplane load and chopping down the rainforest to expand production. It is a rigged game where the rules only apply to one side, and the result is a foregone conclusion, which is the total bankruptcy of the European agricultural sector. The scandal that nobody in the mainstream media wants to touch is the chemical hypocrisy that sits at the heart of this deal, because the European Union is currently the largest exporter of banned pesticides to Brazil, meaning that German and French chemical giants like BASF and Bayer are manufacturing poisons that are illegal to use in Europe, shipping them to South America to be sprayed on soy and corn, and then importing that same soy and corn back into Europe to feed the animals that you eat. It is a circle of poison that makes a mockery of the Green Deal and the farm-to-fork strategy, because all we are doing is outsourcing our pollution to the Amazon and then importing the cancer back onto our dinner plates. Let's talk about the specific chemicals, because the names matter and the effects are terrifying. We are talking about substances like mancozeb, which is a fungicide classified as toxic to reproduction and an endocrine disruptor that was banned in the EU in 2020, but is used by the ton in Brazil. We are talking about paraquat and atrazine, which are linked to Parkinson's disease and have been banned here for years, but are foundational to the Brazilian agricultural model. When you buy a steak from a French farmer, you are paying for the cost of not using these chemicals. You are paying for the safety and the traceability and the animal welfare standards that make European food the safest in the world. But when you buy a cut of beef imported under this new deal, you are buying a product that was produced with zero of those costs, and that is why it is 30% cheaper. It is not cheaper because they are more efficient. It is cheaper because they are cutting corners that we decided were unethical to cut. The sheer volume of the imports is staggering with the deal, granting access for 99,000 tons of beef and 180,000 tons of poultry and vast quantities of sugar and ethanol, which sounds like just numbers on a page, until you realize that this represents the entire annual production of huge swathes of the French countryside. The French beef industry is already on its knees, with farmers aging out and no young people stepping up to take over because the margins are non-existent. And now the EU expects them to compete with JBS, which is the largest meat processing company in the world, and operates on a scale that makes a French farm look like a backyard garden. JBS has feedlots with tens of thousands of cattle and slaughterhouses that process millions of animals, and they have a history of deforestation and corruption that would make a mafia don blush, but they are now the preferred partners of Brussels because they can deliver the volume that the global market demands. This is the Amazonization of our food supply, where quantity replaces quality, and the connection between the eater and the grower is severed forever. And why is this happening? Why would Emmanuel Macron and the European Commission betray their own people so blatantly? The answer is as simple as it is disgusting. Cars. The German automotive industry needs new markets to sell its luxury sedans and its SUVs, because the Chinese market is drying up and the American market is closing off. So they looked at South America and said, "We will trade you our cars for your cows." It is a direct swap of industrial goods for agricultural goods, where the French farmer is the sacrificial lamb on the altar of the German export economy. Macron knows this, and he has pretended to oppose the deal, giving speeches about strategic autonomy and mirror clauses. But when push came to shove, he folded, because he does not have the power or the spine to stand up to Berlin and the globalist lobby that runs the Commission. He is trying to buy off the farmers with temporary subsidies and promises of strict controls. But the farmers know that these controls are a joke, because the EU inspects less than 1% of the food that enters its ports. There are not enough inspectors in the world to check every container coming from Brazil. And once that meat is in the system, it is labeled processed in EU. And you will never know that it came from a feedlot in the Mato Grosso that used to be a jaguar habitat. The labeling laws are deliberately confusing to hide the origin of the ingredients, so that lasagna you buy or that burger at the fast food chain is going to be full of Mercosur beef, and you won't even have the choice to boycott it. This is why the tractors are in the streets, and this is why the manure is being sprayed on the prefecture buildings, because the farmers understand that this is an existential threat. If this deal goes through and the tariffs are removed, it is game over for the livestock sector in France. We will see the collapse of the Limousin and Charolais breeds. We will see the abandonment of the bocage landscapes that define the French geography. And we will see the total desertification of the rural provinces as the last remaining economic engine, agriculture, is turned off. The villages will die, the schools will close, and the land will be bought up by speculators for solar farms, or simply left to rot. And do not think for a second that this only affects the farmers, because once the domestic supply is gone, you are at the mercy of the global market for your daily calories. Look at what happened with energy prices when we became dependent on foreign gas. And now imagine that happening with bread and milk and meat. If there is a drought in Brazil or a political crisis in Argentina, the price of food in Paris will triple overnight, and there will be no local farmers left to fill the gap because they will have all gone bankrupt 10 years ago. Food sovereignty is national security, and by outsourcing our stomach to South America, we are making ourselves vulnerable to blackmail and starvation. The health implications are essentially a slow-motion public health crisis, because the cumulative effect of consuming these pesticide residues over a lifetime is unknown. But the rise in cancer rates and fertility issues gives us a pretty good clue. The European Food Safety Authority sets maximum residue limits. But these limits are constantly raised to accommodate trade deals, and the testing methodologies are flawed because they do not account for the cocktail effect of mixing multiple chemicals together. You are being treated as a biological filter for the profits of the agrochemical complex, which sells the poison to Brazil and then feeds you the result. The audacity of the lies being told by the officials is breathtaking. Ursula von der Leyen stands at the podium and talks about a win-win situation and sustainable development, while signing a deal that incentivizes the burning of the Amazon rainforest, because every new cow that is exported to Europe requires new pasture, and that pasture comes from cutting down trees. The hypocrisy of the environmental NGOs is also on full display, because many of them are strangely silent or offering only token resistance because they are funded by the same corporate foundations that want this deal to go through. It is left to the farmers, the bad guys with their diesel tractors, to actually defend the environment and the health of the public. The Coordination Rurale and the FNSEA are the only effective opposition left in Europe, and that is why the state is coming down on them so hard. They are being painted as far-right extremists and polluters to delegitimize their struggle, but the reality is that they are the last line of defense against a corporate takeover of life itself. The logic of the Mercosur deal is the logic of the plantation, a few giant owners managing vast monocultures for export, while the local population is reduced to serfdom or irrelevance. France, with its tradition of small independent producers and high-quality gastronomy, stands in the way of this logic, and therefore, France must be broken. That is what we are witnessing. The destruction of the French agricultural model is not an accident, it is the goal. They want to replace the stubborn independent peasant who owns his land and speaks his mind with a compliant gig worker who drives a tractor for a multinational corporation or a lab technician who grows meat in a vat.